one stolen map, a midnight riverbank thick with fog, and a duke with eyes so sharp they could read the truth behind 1,000 careful lies. Emilia Voss had spent years learning to be invisible, learning to fold herself into corners, to breathe quietly, to never, not once, be the person anyone remembered. She was good at it. Better than good. She had turned survival into an art form. But on this particular night, a Tuesday in late October of 1815, when the Thames smelled of coal, smoke, and secrets, her invisible streak ended. She did not hear him coming. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside, and by the time she did, it was already too late. One moment, she was crouched at the river's edge, tucking a rolled document beneath the loose stone where she had hidden things before. The next moment, a long shadow stretched across the mud beside hers. A deep, unhurried voice came from directly behind her, calm the way a storm is calm, right before it breaks. That document belongs to the Crown. Emilia did not scream. She did not run. She had learned long ago that panic was a luxury only the comfortable could afford. So she rose slowly, turned around, and looked directly into the face of the one man in all of London she had prayed she would never meet. Duke Elias Whitmore, the man the papers called unmovable, the man the court called incorruptible, the man the poor called a myth, because surely no one that powerful could actually be that fair. He was watching her the way a man watches something rare, not with hunger, not with anger, but with the quiet, devastating attention of someone who already understands more than you wanted him to. And in that moment, standing in the mud, with ink still on her fingers, and someone else's secret pressed beneath her boot, Emilia Voss made a choice that would either save her life or end it. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. She looked him straight in the eye and said, "I can explain." He tilted his head slightly. "I imagine you can," he replied. "The question is whether I'll believe you." "Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now?" Because if this story already has your heart beating a little faster, just wait. Thank you so much for being here. It truly means the world. Stories like this, one, exist because of readers and viewers like you, and we need your support to keep them coming. If this story is already pulling at something inside you, please hit that subscribe button for us. Smash the like and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. It helps more than you know. All right, thank you. Now let's get back to the story. London, England, October 1815. The carriage moved through the dark streets of London without any lanterns lit on its exterior, which was either a sign of enormous wealth or enormous paranoia. Emilia had concluded, within the first 10 minutes of being inside it, that it was probably both. She sat across from Duke Elias Whitmore, with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight, because showing any kind of weakness to a man like the same as would be the same as the Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside, handing him a knife and pointing at your own throat. She had not survived 23 years in the underbelly of this city by being careless with her vulnerability. He had not arrested her. That was the part she could not make sense of. A duke, with the full authority of the Crown behind him. He had found her crouched at the Riverside with a document that could have sent her directly to Newgate Prison, and instead of calling for a constable, he had simply said, "Get in the carriage." And she, because she was many things, but she was not stupid, had gotten in the carriage. Now he sat across from her in the dim interior, his black evening tailcoat perfectly pressed, his white cravat not disturbed by so much as a single crease, his dark eyes level and unreadable. He looked exactly like what he was. A man who had never once in his life been told no, and was not entirely sure what the word meant. And yet, There was something in the set of his jaw, something careful, something that looked just barely, just at the edges like exhaustion. "You are Amelia Voss," he said. "Not a question. You already know who I am," she replied, "which means you already know considerably more about me than I am comfortable with." The ghost of something crossed his face, not quite a smile. More like the acknowledgement that a smile had once been a possibility. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret. By the Riverside, your father was James Voss, cartographer, died 3 years ago with a debt to Lord Pemberton's estate that you have been servicing ever since. He paused. Primarily through the sale of forged historical documents to collectors who are not discerning enough to notice. The carriage wheel hit a stone in the road. Neither of them moved. "What you found tonight," Amelia said slowly, "was not what you think it was. I know exactly what it was," he said. "A survey map commissioned by my late father, Duke Henry Whitmore, documenting the water access points along the southern Thames. A survey that was supposed to have been destroyed 20 years ago, but was not because someone in this city has been using the information on it to systematically divert clean water away from the working districts of Southwark and Lambeth, blaming natural silting while privately engineering the blockages to force residents into dependency on water merchants they happen to own." Amelia stared at him. She had known the document was important. She had not known it was that important. "The people are getting sick in Southwark," she said. It was barely a whisper. "The cholera outbreak last summer, the ones they blamed on the poor sanitation habits of—" "Yes," he said. The word landed like a stone, dropped into still water. The Duke accidentally discovered a secret by the Riverside. She thought of Mrs. Holt, her neighbour's daughter, who had been 4 years old when she died last August. She thought of the water in their street that had tasted of iron and smelled of something worse. She thought of the men she had seen in the pamphlets wealthy, titled men speaking at Parliament about the unfortunate conditions of the poor, with the practiced grief of people performing sorrow they did not feel. Her hands tightened in her lap. "So what do you want from me?" she asked. "There is an ancient land treaty stored in the Whitmore estate archives," he said. "My father hid it before he died. I know it exists. I have reason to believe it contains the original property boundaries that these men have been forging over for 2 decades. But the document is water-damaged and partially coded in a form of cartographic notation that no one in my household can read." He looked at her steadily. "Except I believe you." Amelia was quiet for a long moment. "You want me to decode a document that would expose some of the most powerful landowners in England?" "Yes. And in exchange, the Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. Your debt to Lord Pemberton's estate is cleared. Your family's lodgings in Cheapside are secured for 5 years. And you will live in Whitmore House as my ward until the work is complete, which provides you legal cover, a social identity and protection from the men who will come looking for that survey the moment they realize it's missing." Amelia looked at him for a long time. She had been offered things before. She knew how to read an offer, the way she read documents, looking for the hidden marks, the places where the ink had been pressed differently, the signs of something concealed beneath the surface. But this man looked at her like she was a person, not a tool, not a criminal, not a problem to be managed, like a person. She could not entirely decide if that made it better or worse. "I have conditions," she said. He raised one eyebrow. "My mother stays in Cheapside. She is not moved. She is not involved. She does not know the real nature of my arrangement with you." Agreed. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. If at any point I believe the arrangement has become dangerous to anyone other than myself, I reserve the right to walk away. He considered this. "Agreed," he said. with the caveat that you tell me first, before you walk." She nodded once. "Then we have a deal," Emilia said. She did not offer her hand. He did not either. They simply looked at each other across the dark interior of the carriage. And something settled between them that was not quite trusted yet, but was something in the same family as it, the shape of a thing that could, with time and care, become real. The carriage rolled on through the fog. Whitmore House appeared out of the darkness like a ship out of mist. Enormous, stone-faced, every window blazing with warm light, as if it had been expecting them. A butler, in immaculate grey livery, stood at the top of the steps with a lantern, his expression revealing nothing which, Emilia would learn, was the expression Arthur Hayes wore for everything from "good morning" to "the ceiling is on fire." "Miss Voss," the Duke said as the carriage door opened, "welcome to your temporary home." The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. Emilia stepped out into the cold October night, looked up at the vast face of the house, and thought, temporary. Right, that was what she told herself. Arthur Hayes had been in service to the Whitmore family for 31 years, which meant he had seen things. He had seen the previous Duke drink himself into a quiet decline. He had seen the young Elias come home from the war thinner and harder, and full of silences that had never quite left him. He had seen the estate come back to life under the current. Duke's careful hands, the grounds Huns restored, the staff treated like human beings, the books balanced not through cruelty but through discipline. He had, in short, seen everything. So, when the Duke walked in at midnight with a young woman who had ink on her collar and mud on her boots and the most determinedly composed expression Arthur had ever seen on someone who was clearly terrified, he simply said, "I'll have the blue room prepared, Your Grace," and went to do exactly that. Later, when the house was quiet, he found the Duke in the library with the lamp burning low and a glass of brandy untouched on the desk beside him. "Arthur," the Duke said without looking up, "how much of the household staff will be a problem?" The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. "None of them, Your Grace. I will brief them in the morning." Arthur set a cup of tea on the corner of the desk, and the Duke always forgot to actually drink the brandy. "Though I would suggest, respectfully, that we inform them she is the daughter of an old colleague of your father's. Families in reduced circumstances. It is the kind of story that requires no embellishment and invites no questions." The Duke looked up. "You already worked it out." "I recognize the name Voss, Your Grace. James Voss made 3 of the maps in the East Gallery. Your father spoke very highly of him." Arthur picked up the untouched brandy and replaced it with the tea. "Whatever she is helping you with, I imagine she is quite good at it." "She is," the Duke said, and for just a moment, something moved in his face that Arthur filed away very carefully for later consideration. "Good night, Your Grace," Arthur said, and withdrew. In the blue room upstairs, Emilia Voss sat on the edge of a bed that was softer than anything she had ever slept on, looked at the fireplace burning warm and gold across from her, and told herself firmly, rationally, like someone reciting facts, that this was a transaction, a business arrangement, nothing more. She believed in herself, mostly. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside Whitmore estate. November 1815. The first week at Whitmore House was, in Emilia's expert opinion, completely bewildering. Not because the house was cold or the people unkind. Quite the opposite. The staff greeted her every morning with a kind of warmth that people who have worked for a good employer for many years tend to carry in their general bearing. Cook, a broad, cheerful woman named Mrs. Aldred, seemed to take Emilia's thin frame as a personal challenge and sent trays to the library 3 times a day that contained enough food to feed a family of 4. The housemaids were helpful without being intrusive. Arthur appeared and disappeared through the house like a benevolent ghost, always exactly when he was needed and never when he was not. What was bewildering was the archive. The Whitmore family had been accumulating documents for 200 years. Land deeds, parliamentary records, correspondence with half the nobles in England, survey maps covering every inch of property from Cornwall to the Scottish border. The late Duke Henry Whitmore had been, apparently, a man who kept everything, including, buried somewhere in this controlled chaos, the treaty that could bring down half the aristocracy. Amelia had been a forger. That meant she was also, by necessity, a reader of documents, of ink, of paper, of the small ways that handwriting revealed the emotional state of the person holding the pen. She could look at a document and tell you within a decade when it was written, who had written it, and whether they had been anxious or confident when they did. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. She loved archives the way other people loved music. She just had never been inside one this large. On the third morning, Arthur found her standing in the middle of the archive room, surrounded by stacks she had organized into a system that only she could read, with a piece of charcoal in her hand and a large sheet of paper on the floor, on which she had begun drawing a map of the room's contents. "Miss Voss," he said carefully, "are you mapping the archive?" "The documents are organized by year of receipt," she said without looking up. "But they should be organized by provenance chain. If I can establish which clerk handled which family's correspondence in which decade, I can narrow the search for the treaty significantly." She pointed to a corner she had marked in red. "Also, something in this section has been moved recently. The dust patterns are wrong. I need to know who has been in this room in the last 6 months." Arthur was quiet for a moment. "I will get you the access log," he said. "Thank you, Arthur." He withdrew, and on his way out, permitted himself a very small smile that he would have denied if asked about. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. The Duke came to the archive room every evening. He never stayed long 20 minutes, perhaps 30, but he came consistently, and Amelia noticed that he always stood slightly to the right of wherever the main light source was, and that he never handled documents himself. He would ask her what she had found and listen to her answers with complete attention. And then he would ask questions that were so precisely targeted they felt less like curiosity and more like the work of a man who had thought carefully about a problem for a long time. He was brilliant. She could see it in the questions. She also noticed, and then told herself she had not noticed, that when he moved through the house, he kept his left hand slightly extended, as if checking the distance to walls, that he knew the layout of every room by memory, and never needed to look for a door. That once, when the lamp in the archive had flickered in a draught, he had gone completely still for 2 full seconds before it came back on. She filed this away and said nothing. On the 7th day, she found the first piece of what she was looking for. Not the treaty itself, but a letter, written in 1793 by Duke Henry Whitmore to a solicitor named Edward Cleave, referencing the Survey of Enclosure and the Boundary Agreement of 1787, and warning, in language that grew noticeably more urgent as the letter progressed, that those who profit from the river's rerouting believe themselves beyond the reach of record, but a record exists, and I have made certain it will outlast me. A record exists, and I have made certain it will outlast me. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. Amelia read that line 3 times. She thought of the children in Southwark, drinking water that tasted of rust. She thought of the pamphlets she had seen, the ones printed in the cheap ink of people with no resources and everything at stake, that nobody in Parliament had read, because the people writing them could not afford to deliver them anywhere that mattered. She thought the record exists, and she went back to work. It was 11 at night when she finally looked up to find the Duke standing in the doorway. Holding a lamp of his own lamp, she realized, because the main room lamp had burned low, watching her with an expression she could not entirely decode. "You should sleep," he said. "I found a reference to the treaty," she said, in a letter from 1793. A pause. "Come and tell me," he said. They sat in the library until past midnight, with the fire low and the house silent around them, and tea cooling in 2 cups on the table. And Amelia talked through what she had found while the Duke listened with absolute attention. And somewhere in that room, in that quiet hour, the shape of something shifted between them. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret, by the riverside not much. Just enough to notice. There is something that happens in archives that most people do not know about, because most people have never spent enough time in one. The longer you work with old documents, with the letters and records and surveys of people who have been dead for decades, the more vividly you begin to understand that the past is not gone. It is layered. It sits beneath the present like soil beneath a field, and everything growing now is growing from it. What Amelia was finding in the Whitmore archive was not just a treaty. It was a pattern, a deliberate, sustained, multi-generational pattern of powerful men using property law, the rules about who owns what, where boundaries are drawn, who controls access to resources to quietly tighten their grip on the lives of people who had no legal means to fight back. The water was only part of it. There were records of land enclosures that had forced farming families off common land they had worked for generations. Records of road diversions that had cut off market access for entire villages. Records of tax assessments levied differently on the same quality of land, depending on whether the owner had a title. This is the part of history that does not make it into the books that wealthy families keep on their shelves. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the riverside, but it makes it into the lives of the people who lived it. And Amelia Voss, who had grown up in one of those lives, understood every word of it. Whitmore Estate. Late November 1815. The Midsummer Gala was still 2 months away, which meant Amelia had exactly 2 months to learn how to walk into a room full of aristocrats and not look like someone who had spent the previous decade hiding from them. This, as it turned out, was harder than decoding water-damaged survey maps. The etiquette lessons were Arthur's idea. He presented them to Amelia on a Tuesday morning with the grave, measured authority of a man presenting a battle plan. You will need to know how to enter a room, how to address a peer, the correct fork for each of the 5 courses at a formal dinner, the difference between a curtsy appropriate for a duchess and one appropriate for a baroness. The Arthur, Amelia interrupted. How many forks are we talking about? 5, he said. 6 if there is a fish course. She stared at him. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the riverside. Why, she said very carefully, does one fish require its own fork? Arthur's expression was the image of dignity. Because it does, Miss Voss. The Duke, who had appeared in the doorway at this precise moment, made a sound that Amelia was almost completely certain was a suppressed laugh. She turned to look at him. He was studying the ceiling with enormous interest. You could have told me, she said. About the fish fork, he said, expression entirely neutral. It seemed like something worth discovering organically. That is extraordinarily unhelpful. Yes, he agreed, and walked away. The lessons were, in the end, less terrible than Amelia had expected, because Arthur was a genuinely excellent teacher, patient and specific in a way that came from a man who understood that knowledge was not innate, but learned, and that the gap between knowing something and not knowing it was simply the time and care it took to teach it properly. He did not make her feel stupid for not knowing. He made her feel capable of learning. This was, Emilia reflected, a rarer quality than it should be. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. The walking practice was the part that made her want to dissolve into the floor. Not because she could not learn it, she learned it in 2 sessions, but because the Duke had, for reasons she still did not fully understand, decided to involve himself. He stood in the center of the long gallery with his hands behind his back and watched her walk from one end to the other with a book on her head. And the problem was not that he said anything critical. The problem was that he said nothing at all, just watched with that particular focused attention of his. And the silence felt like a weight she was carrying in addition to the book. On the 3rd pass, she stopped. "Say whatever you are thinking," she said. "I'm not thinking about anything. You have an expression. I always have an expression. It is my face. It is a specific expression for you." She stopped, took a breath. "You are doing that thing where you notice something and decide not to say it." A beat. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. "You walk," he said finally, "like someone who is used to moving quickly and quietly, like someone who has spent years taking up as little space as possible." He met her eyes. "You do not need to do that here. You are allowed to take up space." The book slid off her head. Neither of them moved to pick it up. The room was very quiet. "That is the lesson," he said, and left. Emilia stood in the gallery for a long moment. Then she picked up the book, set it back on her head, and walked the length of the room again. Differently, this time. Serafina Vale arrived at Whitmore House on a Wednesday afternoon in the 3rd week of November, unannounced and immaculate, in a pale blue visiting gown that probably cost more than the Whitmore estate's quarterly coal bill. She was 24, the daughter of Viscount Ashford, possessed of a bone structure that painters wept over, and a mind that was considerably sharper than she allowed most people to know. She had decided approximately 18 months ago that she was going to be the Duchess of the Duke, accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside Whitmore. And she pursued this goal with the focused, methodical patience of someone who had learned very early that the world rewards the persistent. She had not, in her planning, accounted for Emilia Voss. Arthur received her in the front parlor with his customary composure. "Miss Voss," he said quietly when Emilia appeared in the hall. A word. He delivered, in the space of about 45 seconds, a complete social briefing. Who Serafina was, why she was there, what she wanted, what she was likely to say, and the precise social register at which Emilia needed to pitch her response. Arthur's briefings, Emilia had learned in 3 weeks, were masterclasses in information compression. The man could summarize a political situation in 4 sentences. "Smile," he added, as a final note, "but not too warmly. She will read warmth as weakness." "Anything else?" "She notices shoes," he said. "Wear the grey ones." Emilia went and changed her shoes. Serafina Vale's reaction to Emilia was a masterpiece of social performance. On the surface, gracious, curious, charming. Beneath it, and Emilia, who read documents for secrets, found this no more difficult to read than a badly forged watermark, a cold and... The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside systematic assessment, the kind of assessment that a general makes when encountering unexpected terrain. Taking stock, calculating. "How lovely," Serafina said, in a voice like a porcelain teacup, beautiful and fragile, and harder than it looked. "I was not aware the Duke had a ward." "The arrangement is recent," Emilia said pleasantly. "My father was a great friend of the late Duke's. We are an old family, simply reduced circumstances. I'm sure you understand." Something behind Serafina's eyes went still and sharp. "Of course," she said. "How kind of Duke Whitmore to take you in." The word "take you in" was doing a great deal of work in that sentence. Emilia heard all of it. "Isn't it?" she agreed, and smiled over the rim of her teacup. Serafina smiled back. The war, it was clear, had begun. London, December 1815. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside Serafina Vale was, it turned out, considerably more dangerous than she looked. This was saying something, because she looked quite dangerous. Over the weeks that followed her first visit, she appeared at Whitmore House, with the regularity of someone who had decided the house was already partly hers. She came for afternoon calls, she came for dinner. She arrived at charitable events at which Emilia was learning to circulate, and positioned herself in the precise social configuration that allowed her to be charming to the Duke while leaving Emilia faintly isolated. Not obviously, not rudely, just architecturally. The way a skilled hostess can rearrange a room without anyone noticing. Emilia noticed. She also noticed that Serafina asked questions, not blunt questions, nothing as artless as, "Who are you really?" or "What are you hiding?" Serafina's questions were so gentle and so natural that they barely felt like questions at all. It felt like a conversation. She would mention a family she knew in Cheapside. Had Emilia perhaps been acquainted? She would remark on a particular style of document repair she had seen at an auction. Did Emilia have any interest in historical paperwork? She would express concern about a recent forgery scandal in the antiquities market. Had Emilia followed the story? Each one landed precisely where it was aimed. Emilia deflected each one with the patience of someone who had spent years being underestimated and had learned to use it like a shield. But the investigation was intensifying. She could feel it. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. In the archive, meanwhile, the work was progressing. The access log Arthur had provided showed that 3 months ago an unknown visitor had been admitted to the estate as a solicitor's clerk for a meeting with the estate's legal managers, a meeting that the Duke had not been present for and had not, in fact, been informed of until after the fact. The clerk had spent 40 minutes in the archive. Several documents from the eastern section had been moved. Someone tipped them off, Emilia said, when she brought this to the Duke. Someone told them that the treaty might be here. Or someone guessed, he said. My father was known to keep records that others thought were destroyed. It would not be the first time someone has attempted to find and remove documentation from this archive. They did not find it, she said. I would have seen the gap. No, they did not find it. He was quiet for a moment, which means it is hidden somewhere they did not think to look. Emilia turned back to the map she had been drawing of the archive's contents. Give me 2 more weeks, she said. She found it in 9 days. It was inside a decorative wooden frame mounted on the archive wall, not hung there, but installed, so that the frame itself was the hiding place. The document was pressed. The Duke accidentally discovered us her secret by the Riverside flat between the backing board and the frame's inner wall, sealed in a waxed cloth envelope. The paper was old, the ink faded but legible in the right light, and the cartographic notation in its margins was the kind that only someone who had been trained by a specific school of mapmakers in the 1770s would be able to read. Emilia could read it because her father had been trained at that same school. She sat on the archive floor with the document in her hands and the lamp close beside her, and did not move for nearly an hour. She read it 3 times. She cross-referenced the property boundaries marked within it, against the survey she had found at the Riverside, against the letter from 1793, against the access records she had been building since her first week at Whitmore House. Everything aligned. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same 6 names. 6 men, 4 of them sitting lords, 2 of them with crown appointments, who had spent 30 years engineering the slow, quiet impoverishment of thousands of people through the deliberate manipulation of land and water records, hiding behind forged property lines and legislative obscurity, and the basic social assumption that poor people do not know their rights. Emilia thought about her father, who had made maps so that the world could be understood, who had believed she knew this about him, had always known that clear information made available to everyone was one of the foundations of a just society, that when people knew the truth of where things were, and who owned what and how power was distributed, they could not be so easily deceived. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. He had died 3 years ago, still in debt, still invisible, still irrelevant to the men in the rooms where decisions were made. But he had taught her to read, and what she could read, she could use. She was still sitting on the floor when the Duke came in. He stopped in the doorway. I looked at her, looked at the document in her hands. "You found it," he said. "I found it," she said. "And it is worse than you thought." He crossed the room and sat down on the floor across from her Duke Elias Whitmore, in his perfectly tailored evening coat, simply sat down on the archive floor and held out his hand. "Tell me," he said. She handed him the document. He held it, and she watched his eyes move across it slowly, with the slightly effortful focus she had noticed before, not of confusion, but of something requiring more concentration than it once had. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. She said nothing. She simply described what it said, reading aloud the sections he was struggling with, her voice quiet and steady, until she had told him everything. When she finished, the rooms were silent except for the fire. 6 names, he said. Yes. Lord Pemberton is among them. She had not missed that. Lord Pemberton, the man who held her family's debt, the man she had been paying, in one form or another, since her father died. The man whose wealth was, in part, built on the deliberate poisoning of the water that had killed Mrs. Holt's 4-year-old daughter. Yes, she said. The Duke looked at the document for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "Are you all right?" he asked. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. It was such a simple question, such a direct question. She could not remember the last time someone had asked her that, and meant it. "I will be," she said, "when this is done." He nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure it gets done," he said. Whitmore Estate, January 1816. January came to London, like an unwelcome creditor, grey, relentless, arriving before you were ready and refusing to leave. The windows of Whitmore House filmed with frost every night and cleared every morning. And the fire in the library burned steadily through the short days as Emilia and the Duke worked on what had become, without them quite deciding it, a shared project. The treaty was the foundation. But a foundation alone does not build a case. What they needed was the structure of evidence around it. The corroborating documents, the paper trail that connected the 6 names to the forgeries, the testimony chain that could survive legal scrutiny. Because the men they were building a case against were not ordinary men. They had lawyers. They had judges who owed them favors. They had the deep institutional advantage of being the kind of people whose words was assumed, by default, to be true. To bring them down, everything had to be perfect. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. This was work Emilia understood. This was the work of evidence, of finding not just the truth, but the provable truth. The truth that could stand in a room full of people who did not want to believe it, and make them believe it anyway. She began to understand during these weeks what the Duke was building toward. He was not simply trying to expose the men involved. He was trying to create a permanent record of something that would outlast the scandal, outlast the politics, outlast the social pressure that would inevitably come to bear once the names were known. He was building toward legislation, toward land and water access reform that would close the loopholes these men had exploited for 30 years, toward the kind of systemic change that would make it harder, not impossible, but harder for this to happen again. He was thinking, she realized, not just about the people who were suffering now. He was thinking about the people who were not born yet. This was the night she dropped her guard entirely. Not dramatically, no sudden revelation, no moment of tearful confession, just a gradual lowering of the careful distance she had kept since the first night in the carriage. She began to say what she actually thought, rather than the slightly edited version she usually offered. She began to argue with him not defensively, but genuinely. Because she disagreed with parts of his strategy, and she had learned that he did not find disagreement threatening. He found it useful. He argued back. These were, she would later think, some of the best conversations of her life. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. The night she discovered his secret was a Wednesday in the middle of January, and it happened not because she was prying, but because she was paying attention. They had been working late. The lamp on the desk was running low, and she had gone to fetch a replacement from the cabinet across the room. And when she turned around, the room was briefly darker than usual, the lamp sputtering before she could light the new one. In that gap of darkness, she heard the sound of paper sliding across a desk, and then a very quiet, very controlled exhale. She brought the new lamp to the desk and lit it. The Duke was sitting with his hands flat on the table and his eyes closed. Just for a moment. When the light came up, he opened them, and she saw the fractional adjustment as his eyes found the room again. The tiny recalibration of where everything was. She set the lamp down carefully and sat back in her chair. The silence stretched. "How long?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. 2 years, gradually. "The physicians believe it will stabilize, but," he stopped, "they are not certain." The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. "Is that why you needed me to read the documents?" she asked. "Not just the notation, but because some of the more damaged sections," he said. "Yes." She looked at him. He was not asking for anything from her. He was simply telling her. Because she had asked, and he had decided, somewhere in the last 2 months, that she was someone he could be honest with, the same way she had been deciding, slowly and against her own inclinations, that he was someone she could trust. "Does Arthur know?" she asked. "Arthur knows everything that happens in this house," he said, with the first entirely unguarded thing she had heard from him, because it was fond, and a little rueful, and completely true. She almost smiled. "I am not going to treat you differently," she said. "I know," he said. "I am also going to start writing the key findings in a larger hand when I transcribe them for the record." He was quiet for a moment. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. "Thank you," he said. Not performatively. Just simply, like the word meant exactly what it said. They went back to work, but something had changed in the room, the way the temperature changes when a door that has been closed for a long time is finally opened. Not dramatic, not suddenly, just different. Different and more honest and better. Emilia understood something about this, later, about the way that watching someone be vulnerable, genuinely and without calculation, does something to the walls you build around yourself. You cannot witness real trust without beginning, somewhere inside, to question why you have kept yourself so carefully locked away. She had spent years believing that needing help was a weakness, that independence was safe, that the only person she could rely on was herself, because relying on other people meant being exposed to the possibility that they would fail you, leave you, use you, vanish at precisely the moment you needed them most. Her father had died. Her mother had grown fragile with grief. Every person she had trusted in the first years after had, in one way or another, demonstrated that trust was expensive, and the returns were unreliable. So she had stopped offering it. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. But here, in this house, something was asking her to reconsider, and she was not entirely sure she had the strength to keep saying no. London, February 1816. The letter was stolen on a Tuesday. Emilia had written it the previous Sunday, a letter to her mother. Ordinary in its language, but containing, in the way that careful people disguise important things in ordinary containers, a reference to her real location and the real nature of her work at Whitmore House. She had written it because her mother was worried, because she had been gone for months, because she could not bear the weight of her mother's unanswered worry any longer. She had meant to burn it after deciding not to send it. She had, instead, left it folded in the inner pocket of her writing desk. On Tuesday afternoon, Serafina Vale paid an unexpected visit to discuss the charity committee for which Emilia had been enlisted as a participant. Emilia had been called away briefly to the kitchen, a small domestic crisis, entirely manufactured, she would later realize, and Serafina had been left in the writing room alone for 9 minutes. 9 minutes was all she needed. Emilia did not know the letter was gone until Thursday, when she reached for it and found the pocket empty. She went very still, ran through the timeline, arrived at the Duke, accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside conclusion, with the methodical, unsentimental clarity of someone who has had to assess damage before and knows that panic does not help. She went to find Arthur. "Miss Voss," he said, reading her expression before she spoke. "What has happened?" she told him. Arthur was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I will need to know exactly what the letter contained." She told him that too. Another silence. "She is going to use it at the Midsummer Gala," Emilia said. "She is going to wait until the audience is maximized, and then present it to whoever she thinks will do the most damage with it." "The Queen's representative will be present," Arthur said. "Lady Harrington has confirmed attendance. If Miss Vale presents any accusation before that audience, it will have the weight of a public declaration," Emilia finished, "and I will have no legal standing to dispute it, because everything in that letter is true." They looked at each other. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. "We need to tell the Duke," Arthur said. "I know." She found him in the library. She closed the door behind her. She stood in the center of the room and told him, in plain and complete language, exactly what had happened, including the parts that reflected badly on her. The letter, what it said. Why did she write it? What it would mean if it was used publicly. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the room was very quiet. "I should have told you sooner," she said. "About the letter, She stopped. "I am sorry." "Stop," he said. She stopped. "You wrote a letter to your mother because you missed her," he said. "That is not something you need to apologize for." He stood up. "Serafina Vale stole it, which is a crime. And she is going to attempt to use it to humiliate you and damage this household's reputation in order to advance her own matrimonial prospects, which is?" He paused, with that particular quality of stillness she had come to recognize as contained fury rather than coldness. "Something we are going to address." The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. "You knew?" she asked. "About her intentions. I have known Serafina Vale since she was 17 years old," he said. "I know exactly what she is and what she is capable of. I have been hoping she would choose another target." a beat. She has not chosen another target. Emilia looked at him. "What are we going to do?" she asked. He looked back at her. "We are going to go to the gala," he said. "And we are going to finish this." He said "we" both times, she noticed. The 2 weeks before the gala were the strangest Emilia had ever lived. On the surface, preparation. The red gown that Arthur arranged, deep silk, structured. The kind of dress that did not apologize for the person wearing it. The rehearsal of the social choreography for an event of this scale. The careful, strategic conversations about who would be present, what the Duke would say, how the evening's events would unfold. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the riverside beneath the surface. A slow and mutual acknowledgement of something that neither of them was saying directly, but that filled every room they were in together, like the warmth from a fire, present, undeniable, impossible to ignore. He had begun to wait for her, not conspicuously, not in a way that could be named or pointed at, but she would come down for breakfast, and he would already be at the table, and he would not begin eating until she sat down. She would be in the archive, and he would appear at 7 o'clock, exactly as he always had, except now he stayed longer. He asked about her mother. He remembered things she had mentioned weeks earlier, and asked follow-up questions about them. The way people do when they are paying a particular kind of attention. She had stopped pretending she did not notice. She had also stopped pretending she did not feel something in return. It was not a comfortable feeling. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of something large, knowing that stepping forward would change everything. And there was no stepping back. The feeling of someone who has been alone for a long time and is being offered something warm and real, and is not sure, after all this time, whether she knows how to hold it without dropping it. On the night before the gala, she was in the gallery, the long room where she had practiced walking with a book on her head. Weeks ago, a different version of herself when he found her. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the riverside. She was standing at the window, watching the snow that had begun to fall over the garden. She heard his footsteps, and then the sound of them stopping, and she did not turn around. "I am not afraid," she said, "in case that's what you came to check." "I know you're not," he said. A pause. "I came," he said, "because I wanted to tell you something. Before tomorrow, when the room will be full of people, and there will be no time for anything to be true." She turned around. He was standing in the middle of the gallery, not far away, his expression carrying that quality she had spent 4 months learning to read, the quality of a man who has very carefully not said things for a very long time, and has decided that this particular thing must be said. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I want you to know that you have earned your place here, not because you were useful to me, not because of the treaty or the archive or the work." He paused. "Because of who you are, and I would not trade the last 4 months for anything I can think of." The snow fell outside the window. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the riverside. Emilia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I used to believe that needing someone was the same as losing yourself, that if you let someone matter to you, you were giving them something they could use against you." "Yes," he said quietly, "I know that belief. I am rethinking it," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Arthur appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of tea on a tray, and the unperturbed expression of a man who had seen this coming from considerably farther away than anyone else, and was simply here to be helpful. "Tea," he said, for the cold. The moment dissolved into something warm and almost funny. Emilia laughed genuinely, helplessly, and the Duke looked at Arthur with the expression of a man who employs an extremely knowing butler and has learned to live with the consequences. Arthur set the tray down and withdrew with enormous dignity. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. "Tomorrow," the Duke said when they were alone again with the tea. "Tomorrow," she agreed. The Midsummer Gala, Whitmore House, March 1816. The night of the Midsummer Gala came in with the particular grandeur that wealthy London reserved for events at which it wanted to display itself. Carriages lining the square, chandeliers blazing through the tall windows, music floating out over the cold night air as if warmth had been exported deliberately into the street for the benefit of those outside looking in. Emilia stood in the entrance hall in the red gown. The gown was exactly right. It was not elaborate. It was structured and deep and unapologetic. And it fit the way well-made things fit, as if it had been made for this version of her, the one that had been assembled, piece by piece, over the 4 months at Whitmore House. The small ruby pendant at her throat had been Arthur's suggestion and the Duke's offering. It was my mother's. She would have wanted it worn. She had put it on and said nothing. She did not need to. Arthur appeared at her side with the particular materialism of a man who has dressed people for important occasions before. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. "You look exactly right," he said quietly. "Now, remember, Lady Harrington is watching from the East Salon. Lord Pemberton will arrive in the second carriage. Seraphina Vale was seen entering through the main approach 20 minutes ago, which means she has already been positioning herself." He paused. "The Duke will be at the top of the stairs at 8. Do not be late." "Arthur," Emilia said. "Yes, Miss Voss, thank you. For all of it." He inclined his head with the grace of a man receiving something he valued, but would not say so out loud. "It has been entirely my privilege," he said. "Now go." She went. The ballroom of Whitmore House was a room designed for exactly this kind of evening. High ceilings, marble columns, chandeliers that threw light in every direction, with the generous extravagance of something that had never needed to count the candles. 300 people circulated through it, dressed in the concentrated wealth of England's upper class, talking with the particular loud quietness of people who want to be seen to be having private conversations. Emilia moved through it with the ease she had spent 4 months building Arthur's etiquette lessons, the Duke's single observation about space, the accumulated practice of being seen without being recognized as someone who did not belong. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. She was good at this now. Seraphina Vale found her at 8:20. She was wearing pale silver, icy, perfect, a visual argument for coldness, and she moved through the room with the confidence of someone who had choreographed the evening and was waiting for her cue. She stopped beside Emilia at the edge of the dance floor with a smile that was frankly beautiful. "You look well," she said. "Thank you," Emilia said. "So do you. A beat." "I found something interesting recently," Seraphina said, conversationally. "The way you might mention a painting you had acquired. A letter, written in a particular hand I recognized." Emilia held very still. "I thought perhaps Lady Harrington might find it interesting," Seraphina continued, "given her position in the Crown's household affairs. A letter revealing that the Duke's so-called ward is, in fact, a known forger with a documented criminal history kept here for purposes entirely at odds with the story presented to society." She tilted her head. "It would be quite a scandal, wouldn't it?" The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. "It would," Emilia agreed. Something in her own voice surprised her. It was calm. Genuinely calm. Not the performed calm of someone managing fear. The real calm of someone who had already thought this through and was ready. "Though I imagine," she added, "that a scandal would be quite uncomfortable for a number of people." including those whose own financial histories might bear closer examinations if someone were to take an interest. Serafina's smile went a fraction more careful. The orchestra paused between pieces. Into that pause the sound of footsteps on the marble stair. The room's attention shifted, as rooms do, toward the staircase. Duke Elias Whitmore descended with the unhurried authority of a man who had never needed a room's attention, but had its absolute attention regardless. He moved through the crowd, which parted with the instinctive deference of people, in the presence of someone genuinely powerful, and came directly to where Emilia was standing. He looked at Serafina. Then he looked at Emilia. Then he took a small folded document from the interior of his coat. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. "Lady Harrington," he said, raising his voice just enough to carry, not shouting, never shouting, simply projecting with the practiced ease of a man who knew how rooms worked. "I wonder if I might have a moment." Lady Harrington, a small woman with the bearing of a retired general, made her way through the crowd with visible curiosity. "I have here," the Duke said, "a document which I would like to submit for formal Crown review. It pertains to a matter of significant public interest." He paused. "It is a land treaty, dated 1787, documenting the original water access boundaries along the southern Thames. I also have a complete evidentiary package connecting this treaty to a pattern of deliberate property manipulation affecting approximately 40,000 residents of Southwark and Lambeth over the past 30 years. The ballroom had gone so quiet you could hear the candles. The names implicated include Lord Pemberton, Viscount Calder, Sir Edmund Finch, Lord Morton, Sir James Briar, and he paused, with the precision of someone placing a document in exactly the right location on a map. Viscount Ashford. Serafina's father. The silver gown did not move. Serafina Vale went absolutely still, in the way that something goes still when a ground it relied upon ceases to exist. Lady Harrington held out her hand for the document. Her expression revealed nothing. She was, after all, a professional. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. "I will have this reviewed this week," she said. "I thought you might," the Duke replied. He turned back to Emilia. Around them, the room had begun to hum 300 people, quietly and rapidly recalibrating. But in the small circle around the two of them, it was quiet. "There was also," he said, loud enough to be heard by the people immediately around them, "a private letter in circulation this evening that does not belong to its current holder. I would appreciate its return." He did not look at Serafina. He did not need to. A moment passed. Then a folded piece of paper appeared on the edge of the nearest side table, left there by a pale-gloved hand attached to someone who was already moving away through the crowd. Arthur appeared from nowhere, as Arthur always appeared, picked it up, and delivered it to Emilia without a word. She held it, felt the familiar paper. Her own handwriting, her words intended for her mother, returned to her. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. She had spent her whole life hiding things. Here, in this room, in front of 300 people who represented the full weight of the world that had always told her she did not belong, she felt something release in her chest that had been held tight for years. Not because the danger was gone, not because everything was resolved, but because, for the first time she could remember, she was not standing alone in it. The Duke offered her his arm. "Dance with me," he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," she said. It was not quite an answer. It was more than that. The aftermath. What followed the Crown investigation that Lady Harrington commissioned took 6 weeks. At the end of those 6 weeks, Lord Pemberton was stripped of his Crown appointment, and his properties placed under legal review. Viscount Calder resigned his. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret, by the Riverside parliamentary seat before he could be asked to. Sir Edmund Finch and Sir James Briar faced civil suits from a coalition of Southwark and Lambeth parish councils, represented by a young solicitor who had spent the previous 3 years documenting resident testimony and waiting, with the patience of someone who believed in institutions, for the evidence that would make the testimony admissible. Lord Morton cooperated with the investigation in exchange for partial immunity, which meant the remaining cases were watertight. Viscount Ashford was the last. His case took the longest because he was the most senior and the most defended. But the evidence was what it was, and evidence, properly assembled and legally submitted, does not care about seniority. Seraphina Vale did not return to London that season. The rumour was that she had gone to the countryside. The reality was simpler. She had gone to reassess. Emilia, who had no interest in cruelty and a deep interest in fairness, hoped that she would emerge from that process as someone better. Some people do. Lord Pemberton's debt against Emilia's family was legally discharged as part of the estate review. Her mother moved from Cheapside to a small house with a garden, which she had wanted for 20 years. The deed was in her own name. Arthur received a commission from the Duke that he had technically been eligible for 15 years, but had never been offered. A full partnership in the estate's management, with compensation to match. He accepted with the quiet dignity of a man receiving something long overdue. "I would have stayed regardless," he said. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. "I know," the Duke replied. "That is not why I'm doing it." Arthur inclined his head. "Thank you, Your Grace," he said. The water access legislation passed Parliament in November 1816, 8 months after the gala. It established for the first time a legal requirement that water infrastructure serving residential populations could not be privately controlled or redirected without public Crown oversight and documented community consent. It was not a perfect law, but it was a beginning. The bill was drafted in significant part from the evidence in the Whitmore archive. The original draft included, in its preamble, an acknowledgement of the cartographic and documentary work that revealed the full scope of the breach language that was, on legal advice, removed from the final version. But the people who knew. The solicitor, who had represented the Southwark Parish Councils, came to Whitmore House in December to deliver a hand-signed letter of thanks from the Residents' Committee. He was 26 years old, earnest and slightly overwhelmed to be in the presence of the Duke. He shook Emilia's hand with considerable vigor and said, "Without the documents you found, none of this would have been possible. You should know that." The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. She thought of her father, of the maps he had made so that the world could be understood, of the belief he had carried all his life that clear information in the hands of ordinary people was one of the foundations of a fair world. "I know," she said. "Thank you for the work you did with it." What Emilia learned, and what we all should. There is something worth sitting with in this story. For 30 years, a small group of powerful men exploited the gap between what records said and what people knew. They relied on the fact that most people, especially people without legal standing, without access to education, without the resources to challenge official documentation, would never be able to prove what they suspected, that the records were inaccessible, or coded, or simply buried under decades of deliberate obscurity. What stopped them was not a law. It was a woman who could read. Literacy, real literacy, the kind that includes reading maps, documents, records, and the hidden language of institutional power, is one of the most democratic tools that exists. Information, made accessible and understood, is a form of protection. It is the reason public records exist. The reason property registries are required to be public. The reason that, in a functioning society, the people affected by laws have a right to know what the laws say. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. This is not a guarantee. Systems fail. Power finds ways around accountability. But the principle matters. Know your records. Understand your documents. Learn the language of the institutions that govern your life. Not because it is easy, but because the alternative is to be governed by people who know that language and are counting on you not to. James Voss believed this. He taught it to his daughter with ink and maps and the patient conviction that the truth, made visible, could not be held back forever. He was right. Emilia and Elias, they were married in the spring. Not with enormous ceremony, both of them had a complicated relationship with enormous ceremony at this point, but with the people they actually cared about. In the garden of Whitmore House, with the early April light coming through the new leaves, and Arthur standing to the side with the expression of a man who has seen exactly this coming for approximately 5 months, and considers himself entirely vindicated. There was a moment, just before the ceremony began, when Emilia stood at the edge of the garden and felt the weight of everything the last year had been. The river, the carriage, the archive, the red gown, the ballroom, the letter returned to her hand, the losses, the discoveries, the slow, terrifying, necessary process of deciding to let someone in. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. The Duke appeared at her side. "Second thoughts?" he asked. "None," she said. "Good," he said. "Nor do I." He took her hand. She held it. It did not feel like losing herself. It felt like the opposite. It felt like finding the version of herself that had always been there, waiting for a life large enough to live in. They spent the following years doing what they had promised each other they would do. The work of making things more fair. Not perfect. Nothing is perfect. And the people who tell you otherwise are usually selling something. But better. More documented. More legible to the people most affected by it. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. Emilia, established, with a founding gift from the Duke and significant administrative competence from Arthur, a record access program for parish councils in 6 London districts, a room with a clerk, a collection of publicly available land and water records, and 1 afternoon a week when any resident could come and have a document read to them and explained in plain language. It was not much. It was the beginning. The Duke's vision deteriorated slowly, and then, at some point in 1819, stabilized whether the physician's optimism had been warranted or whether something else was responsible. They were never entirely sure. What they were sure of was that he had adapted with the same quiet discipline he brought to everything, and that he had never, not once, let it diminish what he was capable of, or what he chose to do with it. They argued about strategy regularly and agreed about values completely. They were, in other words, well matched. And in the long winter evenings, when the fire burned low in the library, and the house was quiet, and the work of the day was finished, they were simply 2 people who had found each other across a midnight riverbank and been brave enough, when it mattered, to say, "Yes, I trust you, I see you, I am here." The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. Before we reach the end, if this story moved something in you, if Emilia's courage, or Elias's quiet strength, or Arthur's steady presence taught you something, or made you feel something real, subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you are watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. Your likes, your comments, your subscriptions, they are the reason stories like this one keep getting told. Thank you. from the bottom of my heart. In the end, this is what the story of Emilia Voss and Duke Elias Whitmore is really about. Not the scandal, not the treaty, not even the romance, as beautiful as it is. It is about the courage it takes to tell the truth in a world that profits from silence. It is about the people who hold knowledge as a weapon against those who cannot access it, and the people who refuse to let them. It is about the quiet, daily, unglamorous work of making things more fair. One document, one record, one conversation at a time. It is about what happens when two people who have each, in their own way, learned to close themselves off, choose deliberately, against their instincts, against the evidence of everything that has hurt them before, to stay open, to trust, let someone in. Emilia Voss spent years taking up as little space as possible. The Duke accidentally discovered her secret by the Riverside. In the end, she filled a room. She earned it, and so do you. Thank you for being here. Stay curious, stay courageous, and we will see you in the next one.